Week 11 of our class, Society and Culture. This week we are diving even deeper into this probably funny sounding concept that I introduced last week, the habitus from Pierre Bourdieu. Before you go any further in this lecture though, I highly recommend you read the wrap-up notes from last week that were also the reading notes for this week. This week is the beginning of 3 weeks of paying attention to and closely reading this book. A terrific book just came out, I believe, just published last year, called Privilege, The Making of an Adolescent Elite at St. Paul's School. Really, I think a really enjoyable book. We're about to see what you think about it. But nonetheless, we begin this book this week, and these 3 weeks for the lectures, what I'll be doing is covering some core concepts that are in the background of this book. I consider this book a great example of what sociology looks like in practice. In the lectures, I'll be doing a bit more of the theory, but the whole point of theory is to help us understand what the patterns of what we're observing in the social world, to make sense of those patterns and explain those patterns. So I'll be giving you some of the more kind of theoretical background, the tools you need to understand what's going on in a book like this, but also to understand how to tackle that paper. By the end of this week, I will post instructions on the final paper for the course. We don't have a final exam, just a final paper. And the paper is specifically about this book. So all the work you do now in terms of all the close reading will really help you for that final paper. But I'll post instructions and you'll see what I mean in terms of how to work with the book for the final paper. So for this week, we really have, we're kind of jumping into use this concept of the habitus to answer a couple of crucial questions. First is, how does someone become who they are? This is a central question in sociology. How does the social world create who we are? Pierre Bourdieu's answer, as we've seen already, even from last week, was that this notion of the habitus helps us to understand how the social world makes who we are. And we're going to talk more about that in this lecture. And we'll also see, importantly, how this habitus, shapes the way we interact with the social world. So let me zoom in really quick to the outline of the lecture. A number of you in your comments to me, your extra credit comments, said, geez, Professor Adler, it'd be great if you could make those lectures have a little bit more structure, particularly kind of an outline, so that as you take notes and as you know what to focus in on, you know what to do. So I'll try and do that this week. Hopefully you can see this. I'm trying to look on the screen. It looks like the writing's dark enough. So we'll dive into what, actually I'll say a few words about the Kahn book, and then we'll dive into what is the habitus, background of this concept, how is it shaped? So in other words, how is this habitus thing structured? That's a word that you often hear sociologists use. How is it structured? And then how does it shape us in the world? Or how does the habitus then structure the world for us as individuals? So this is Pierre Bourdieu, when he'd write, would always almost do these somewhat word games. And one of his classic ones was that the habitus is a structured entity, or a structured part of who we are, which means it's influenced by the social world, and then it structures our experience of the world. So it's a structured entity and a structuring entity. This is Pierre Bourdieu in his kind of deepest, most profound and somewhat confusing sense. So we're going to try and unpack what some of that means. And then finally, I'll end the lecture with a little bit more connection to the Kahn book, which you're reading for this week. So let me begin by saying a few words about the Kahn book, just so you can see right out of the gate how what I'm going to lecture on today really should help to connect to the reading that you're doing. So Kahn, that's his last name. I think he's a professor at Columbia now, Columbia or Yale. Himself, Kahn, is a graduate of the school that's under study here. So it's an elite prep school or secondary school, private secondary high school in New England. And Kahn's a graduate of that. Of course, goes on to Ivy League career, Ivy League institutions for undergrad and graduate, which, according to this whole idea of the habitus, is not surprising. We'll get back to more of that in a second. So that's his own personal trail. But ends up being a sociology graduate student, says to himself, I got to do a dissertation, what should I do? And he decides to think about this question about how the new elite is created or reproduced. Now, I should note here that this book is literally about the elite in this country. We could have done a couple weeks on middle class life and how the habitus of the middle class functions, or there's even a new book about how firefighters how their habitus is made, how they see the world. But I decided to go ahead and pick this book. So Kahn says, well, if I want to understand the new elite, there's no place like the school that I came from, the secondary preparatory school they came from. So he goes back, and what's important here is St. Paul's is the sort of school where people talk about the best kids go to receive the best education. Well, Kahn, being a good sociologist, hears those words, sees them, moves them to the side and says, I want to see what's really going on in the school. I want to take away the whitewash, not to show that it's not a good place, but to show how the place operates, to show how it is that at a place that supposedly is about forming open-minded, democratic, creative, equitable students, how it is that that actually reproduces and recreates a new form of inequality in the United States. Now, it's really important in the first chapter of the book to pay attention that Kahn is making a historical argument at first. What he's doing is he's looking backwards in time to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we had one of the first kind of post-colonial pinnacles of economic centralization and, or I should say, centralization of capital and production of a new elite. So think of Carnegie's and Rockefellers. And Kahn's saying, well, back then, the elite operated a little differently. They were oftentimes very exclusive, so they had homes in the Hamptons, or they were in the part of town that was on the right side of the tracks, but they had the best piece of property up on a hill and were separated from everyone. And that they excluded other classes and social worlds from themselves. And so a lot of philanthropy that was born in the early 1900s was about trying to make better those poor souls out there who aren't as well off and as educated as I am. So we can think of Carnegie, who really helped to found the modern library system that we all know and love. And it was partly out of this sense of separation and betterness and kind of looking down on the non-elite and the non-rich. And what Kahn is saying is that things have totally changed. And said in the United States today, instead, the new elite and inequality is linked, and this is important, to an ideology of meritocracy. And the ideology of meritocracy says whatever you have achieved, or whatever anybody in the world has achieved, whatever position they've gotten to, is because of their own individual merit, talent, and the fact that they worked for it. So be very clear here that what Kahn is saying is that in this era of the new elite, meritocracy is the ideology that covers over what's really driving the system. And so on page 40, he says that the quote, great trick of inequality in this day and age is that it seems legitimate because it seems that whoever is rich, whoever is poor, whoever has power, whoever is disenfranchised, naturally is that way because that's what they earned or didn't earn for either working a lot or not working a lot. So this is really important. What Kahn is getting us into is showing that the elite works very differently today. They're not able to be so separated and excluded from people. But just as the nature of social life have changed so they can't be separated and excluded, we have this growing ideology of meritocracy that somehow the people in the new elite are there because they deserve it. So in the first, or in the second chapter, which is the main part of the reading for this week, Kahn, this is what our discussion focuses on for this week. Kahn uses this concept of habitus quite a bit. In particular, he's looking at how hierarchical relations work in the school, and also how relationships across great distances of inequality work in the school. And what's important here is he's showing us that these two two behaviors, or these two realities, hierarchies and inequality. They must, navigating those, accepting those and navigating those must become natural to the students in this elite school. And even more importantly, they must become useful skills that are second nature to the students and can help them to recreate this unequal society going forward in the elite careers and elite lives that they will live. So what we're talking about here for the rest of the lecture, all the theoretical background, this idea of the habitus, is what's in the background of Kahn's mind as he walks into St. Paul's School. He's read everything we've read here. He's read the Bourdieu book that we read a few parts from last week. And he walks into St. Paul's School and he's trying to make sense of it. And so he wants to use this idea of the habitus because Bourdieu used it to think about inequality and cultural capital and things like that. But Kahn is saying things are different. This is America or United States. This is early 21st century. It's no longer 1970s France for Bourdieu. So things don't work exactly the same. But what he's doing is he's taking this idea and now making it work for him. Let me say here as we get started a few a real quick background on where the word habitus actually comes from. Overall, in Pierre Bourdieu's thinking, it's a synthetic concept that he's built from his reading of philosophy and his reading of social theory. And importantly, there's kind of two anchor points as he came up with this idea in the 1960s and 1970s. First was that he was very familiar, as many of you are, or if you're not, maybe should be, with Aristotelian thinking, so Aristotle's thought. And if you remember, a core part of Aristotle's thought was that life, the good life, is about the development of virtues until the point where virtuous behavior becomes a habit. It becomes part of us. It becomes second nature. And Aristotle's idea then was that we aren't born virtuous, but if we practice the virtues, we eventually become virtuous, and then we have virtue, or we are virtuous. And so the word habit actually in Latin means a state of having. So our word habit traces back to a Latin word habere, I think I'm saying that wrong, H-A-B-E-R-E, which means to have, so a state of having. So the word habit literally means kind of a disposition to behave in certain ways, a second nature, or in the Aristotle example, it means having virtue. So Bourdieu sees this kind of sense of the word habit and says, well, I want to make sense of how people come to be in certain ways in the social world, and how it feels natural, and how it's an occurrence of the way we interact with the social world. So he says, all right, I'll start with this root word habit. I'll call it habitus. And it's important to keep in mind here that what Bourdieu is really doing is he's making a workable example, or workable for the modern world way of doing what Durkheim did. And if you remember, we talked at one point about rituals and totems, and Durkheim's sense that from those ritual moments of social interaction became, we got collective representations, which then were the way we organized and thought about the world, and those re-entered us. So our thinking of the social world was inherently social. And Bourdieu's leaping off from that, saying Durkheim had a great idea, but I'm going to take that great idea and I'm going to run with it and make something out of it. So I'll be right back, and we'll dig deep into this concept of the habitus.